Joining us now, Donald Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen. He's also the author of Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics, and the host of the podcast, Mea Culpa, also the co-host of the podcast, Political Breakdown, Indictment Watch. Michael, good to have you with us this morning. As we look at this new superseding indictment, as Sarah just went through that very important timeline there, what struck me is what allegedly happened with Walt Nauta, shifting these travel plans abruptly, going down to Mar-a-Lago to talk to folks down there. In your role, when you worked for the former president, is this something you would have been dispatched to do?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. This is so part of the Trump playbook that when I heard it on television, it didn't surprise me at all. Everybody running around, you got to take care of the boss, do what the boss says. You know, you may remember, Erica, I had said on this program a long time ago when these indictments first started coming out that this is not unusual for Donald Trump to want to get rid of documentation, to delete stuff. And the real question that we have to ask is, what documents does he have? What documents did he show to people? You know, is this his id? Is it his ego? Was it in order to be able to show off with letters like from Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un? And the answer to that is no. And I stated that I believe that there's more nefarious reasons that Donald is keeping these documents. And I'm shocked and I'm appalled that there are still people that are supporting him. When we must understand that he is placing our national security in complete chaos simply for his own personal benefit.
And if there is more, it will be interesting to see if, in fact, those come out. You raise interesting and important concerns, as you point out. I want to get your take on a couple of other things, though, because as you say, this is a page right from the playbook. One thing that does stand out as rather unusual is a 24-minute phone call. Can you recall Donald Trump having a 24-minute phone call with someone? And if so, why would he stay on the phone so long?
Yeah, I've had 24-minute phone calls with Donald.
But when you were his attorney?
Very important. It was sometimes personal, sometimes it was over issues that needed to be resolved. And he would go sometimes into lengthy discussion in terms of what he wanted done with pretty, with real specificity, which is why it would take longer. I mean, 24 minutes for Donald is an eternity. It doesn't happen often, so it's obviously about something that is of real significance and importance.
So significant, but not entirely surprising to you that it would last that long. Loyalty, as many of us have discussed with you, and so many people have also discussed, is key for Donald Trump. I want to go through some of what we learned in this superseding indictment, which alleges that in the weeks after the FBI found the documents in the storage room, that Walt Nauta reached out to a Trump employee to ask, quote, "Someone just wants to make sure Carlos is good," referring to Carlos de Oliveira, who again is the new defendant now with the superseding indictment. The employee allegedly told Nauta that de Oliveira was loyal and wouldn't do anything to affect his relationship with Trump. The information was then relayed, and according to the indictment, that very same day, Trump himself called de Oliveira, told him he would get him an attorney. I know you've talked about what your loyalty to Donald Trump cost you. What would you tell Carlos de Oliveira in this moment?
Sadly, I've made this statement to many different people, starting with like Rudy Giuliani, Giuliani, and so many others. Walt Nauta, run. Carl, run. Run as fast. First of all, he's not going to get you an attorney. He's not going to pay for the attorney. You may have just seen that with the settlement that I just was engaged in. He's not going to pay for it unless you stay on message. And if you stay on message, you will end up behind bars. There's no doubt about it. You know, one of the things that Donald also doesn't understand is he doesn't understand technology at all. When he thinks that, you can just delete it from the local server, what he's missing is the fact that there's another server, the main server, which was held at the Trump Organization property, that somehow everything was downloaded to. And the fact that he wanted to get rid of this information, which in law is called spoliation, after he had a subpoena. This is really damaging stuff, but it just doesn't seem to be damaging to that 36, 37% of the GOP loyalists that no matter what he does, they are standing behind him. I wonder if they'll stand behind him if, God forbid, there's another, attack on America as a direct result of his negligence.
As we look to see how this plays out and what the reaction is, especially tonight in Iowa, you lay out the consequences that you have felt, obviously, from your loyalty and what others have dealt with as well. How is it that Donald Trump continues to bring people into his orbit and to garner that loyalty? What does he provide? I mean, maybe it's a promise of an attorney, which you say he's not going to pay those fees. What is it? What do you think he's promising people?
Yeah, look, it's not as devious as you might think. The man is a cult leader, plain and simple, and he has managed, to indoctrinate into this cult many millions of people, many millions of Americans who are parting with their hard-earned dollars to give it to a billionaire so he could fix an old 757 or to pay for his own legal fees or his own responsibilities. Why we do it, why I did it, I don't really have a good enough answer to give to you that would satisfy anyone, myself or even my family, that still asks me the same question. There's something about ourselves that we were following that I can't explain. It's something that you would probably need a cult expert, to explain on what is it that they say and what is it that they do and what we're missing ourselves that cause us to stay in this cult.
Michael Cohen, appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Let's bring in CNN senior analyst, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, Ellie Honig, CNN political commentator and former Trump White House communications director, Alyssa Farah-Griffin, and CNN political commentator and former special advisor to President Obama, Van Jones. Alyssa, to you first, just because you worked in the Trump White House so closely with him, but your relationship with Trump, it was different than Michael Cohen, obviously, who's had litigation with him. Do you sort of second what you just heard?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm still shocked at, to this day, how many people remain loyal to Donald Trump. He has an air about him that kind of commands loyalty. It commands people wanting his approval. I was honestly very shocked when I went to work for him in the West Wing and saw how many people just wanted his approval. And there was lack of kind of wanting to advise him at times because you might get on his bad side. He's very good at keeping people in line, but he also uses incentives to do that. He has a good way at keeping people on his team and loyalty. And this was by design, by the way, with these individuals. I mean, it's textbook Donald Trump. He's going to lower level people asking to do his dirty work, people who aren't necessarily going to have the Constitution to stand up to a former, maybe future president. And he knows what he's doing when he does that.
And as we watch this play out, what's interesting too, with all these new details that we're hearing, is how it is this playbook, right? That Michael talked about, that you're saying in terms of what you saw, Ellie. Does that figure in at all in this case into a pattern here?
Well, so it's so interesting when we consider the notion of loyalty, because when we're looking at what is Walt Nauta going to do, what is Carlos de Oliveira, now the new defendant, going to do, the decision whether to cooperate with the government, which I've been on the other side of many times, is really complicated. And it comes down to sometimes a financial decision, a philosophical decision, a moral decision. And I think what Donald Trump may have recognized now, which Michael is a good example of, is it's really hard to break away from Donald Trump and sort of come clean and find yourself on the other side, because there's a penalty, right? Michael Cohen was attacked. Michael Cohen lost a lot of money. Michael Cohen went to jail.
Yeah.
Donald Trump hasn't as of this point. And I think Donald Trump perhaps made the calculation that it's going to be much harder for these guys who are maintenance workers at my staff. They're not going to have the means. They're not going to have the motive. And so it's safer if I do my dirty work through them, through people who are perhaps more headstrong or better positioned, like a Michael Cohen. It looks like he may have had an adjustment in his strategy there.
Not only do you know politics inside and out, you also went to a pretty good law school, Mr. Yale. What do did you think when you read the superseding indictment, sort of on the legal side, but then also the politics of what this does in the party?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to stay a little bit with the human factor. I do think, it's tough if you're just a regular, everyday person and you get a job with a celebrity, you get a job with a big politician, and all of a sudden, your mom's proud of you, you've got cool stuff to talk about at Thanksgiving dinner, everybody's asking you questions, and you're a little bit of an authority, and then suddenly that person gets in trouble. Well, what do? The alternative is, I'm going to jump back into the ocean of anonymity where I don't have any special standing and maybe don't have support, and maybe I get in trouble, the law comes after me, and nobody's going to help me out because my cousin can't help me, nobody can help me. So I think sometimes we're tough on people who hang on to the rich and powerful. People reading People magazine, all kind of stuff, just trying to get a sniff of a little bit of celebrity.
That's such an interesting point, not to interject, but David Schoen, who, defended Trump in the second impeachment trial, basically said that he believes that Nada and De Oliveira are here. This is overbearing to charge them in this way. It sort of gets to...
Look, I think you got to go after the little people to get the big people. In other words, I think that one of the concerns that people have always with the criminal justice system is it's always the little people do the big time and the big people do no time. And so hopefully we're going to be seeing something different in this situation.